My son flew to the coast with his wife and mother-in-law, leaving me at the farm to work alone. I'm June 65 years old, and for 4 decades I've poured my heart into our family farm in rural Wisconsin. My son Thomas used to love this land, but his wife Natalie never understood our way of life. Last week they flew to Florida with Natalie's mother Catherine, leaving me alone with all the work. I thought I could manage until their vacation ended, but then came a phone call that shattered everything I believed about family trust. Before I tell you about that unforgettable call, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever felt taken advantage of by your own family. The morning dew still clung to the grass as I walked across our 60-acre farm, my boots leaving temporary impressions in the soft earth. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. This land had been my home for 40 years, ever since Harold and I purchased it as newlyweds, with nothing but dreams and determination. Our farm sits in the heart of America's Midwest, surrounded by rolling fields of corn and soybeans that stretch toward the horizon. We grew various crops over the years, but our specialty had always been our vegetable garden and greenhouse. We supplied local farmers markets and a few restaurants in the nearby town with fresh produce. It wasn't a massive operation, but it provided a good living and allowed us to be self-sufficient. Harold and I built everything from scratch. The farmhouse, a 2-story structure with white siding and blue shutters, was originally just a small cabin that we expanded over decades. The red barn, now showing its age with faded paint, was one of the first structures we renovated together. The greenhouse, my pride and joy, was added 20 years ago, when I wanted to extend our growing season through the harsh Wisconsin winters. 5 years ago, Harold passed away from a heart attack while fixing the tractor. One moment he was laughing, telling me about a funny story he had heard at the feed store, and the next he was clutching his chest, falling to his knees. By the time the ambulance arrived, winding its way up our long gravel driveway, it was too late. 40 years of marriage ended in minutes, leaving me alone with a farm too big for one person to manage comfortably. Thomas, our only child, had once loved the farm. As a boy, he would follow Harold around, eager to learn everything about planting seasons, animal care, and machinery maintenance. His small hands would grasp tools too big for him, determined to help. But as he grew older, his interests changed. The call of the city proved stronger than the pull of the land. He went to college to study accounting and never returned to live on the farm, settling in Madison with his wife Natalie. Natalie was born and raised in Chicago, a true city girl who viewed our farm with thinly veiled disdain. She complained about the dirt, the smell, and the isolation whenever they visited, which became increasingly rare over the years. Her perfectly manicured nails and designer clothes seemed out of place among the chickens and vegetable patches. She would wrinkle her nose at the compost pile and refuse to help with even the simplest farm chores. "I just don't understand why you want to live like this, June," she said during their last visit, watching me feed the chickens. "It's so much work, and for what? You could sell this place, buy a nice condo in the city, and actually enjoy your retirement." What Natalie never understood was that for me, this wasn't just work. It was my life, my passion, my connection to Harold, and the decades we spent building something together. Catherine, Natalie's mother, was another complicating factor in our family dynamic. A wealthy widow from Chicago's North Shore, she had been spoiled by her late husband's success in real estate. Catherine made it her mission to control Thomas and Natalie's lives, constantly offering unsolicited advice and financial assistance that came with strings attached. She referred to our farm as that quaint little hobby of mine, refusing to acknowledge that it was a legitimate business and my livelihood. After Harold died, I noticed Thomas becoming more distant. Our weekly phone calls dwindled to monthly, then to major holidays only. His visits became obligatory rather than joyful. I tried to maintain our connection, asking about his work at the accounting firm, sending care packages of homemade preserves and vegetables, but something had changed. The gleam of excitement that once filled his eyes when he drove up our driveway had dimmed, replaced by what looked like resignation. Meanwhile, my daily routine grew more challenging without Harold. Every morning I woke before dawn to tend to our small herd of dairy cows and the chickens. The animals needed to be fed and watered, the cows milked, eggs collected. Then came the endless tasks of maintaining the property. Fences needed repair equipment, broke down the vegetable garden, and greenhouse demanded constant attention. By evening, my body ached from the physical labor, but there was still paperwork to handle, bills to pay, and planning for the next day. Martha Johnson, my closest neighbor, whose farm was a mile down the road, occasionally helped out, but she had her own land to manage. We would meet for coffee on Sunday afternoons, sharing stories and supporting each other through the unique challenges faced by aging women running farms alone. "You need to hire some help, June," Martha told me repeatedly. "You can't do everything yourself." She was right, of course, but hiring help required money, and the farm's profits had been decreasing slightly each year. I was making ends meet, but there wasn't much extra for labor costs. Besides, this farm was my responsibility now. Harold wouldn't have wanted me to give up or cut corners. So I continued alone, muscles, sore hands calloused, but spirit unbroken. Until the phone call that would change everything. 2 weeks ago, Thomas called on a Tuesday evening. I had just finished dinner, a simple meal of garden vegetable soup and homemade bread, when the phone rang. Seeing his name on the caller ID sent a wave of warmth through me. It had been nearly a month since our last conversation. "Thomas, how are you, sweetheart?" I answered, unable to hide the excitement in my voice. "Hey, Mom," he replied, his tone businesslike. "I wanted to let you know that Natalie, Catherine, and I are planning a trip to Florida next week. We'll be staying at a beachfront resort in Naples for 10 days. "That sounds wonderful," I said, sincerely happy that my son would have some time to relax. His job at the accounting firm often meant long hours, especially during tax season. "When do you leave?" "Next Monday," he said. "Catherine has a friend who owns a condo there and offered it to us at a discount. It was too good to pass up." I should have known Catherine would be behind this sudden vacation. She was always orchestrating family events, inserting herself into Thomas and Natalie's marriage in ways that seemed inappropriate to me. But I kept those thoughts to myself. "Well, I hope you all have a wonderful time," I said. "Take lots of pictures for me." There was a pause on the line before Thomas added, almost as an afterthought, "You could come too, Mom, if you want." The invitation lacked any genuine enthusiasm. It was clearly a formality, words spoken out of obligation rather than desire. Besides, we both knew it was impossible. Who would take care of the farm? The animals couldn't feed themselves, and the greenhouse plants would wither without daily watering. "That's sweet of you to offer, Thomas, but you know I can't leave the farm, especially not during planting season," I replied, trying to mask my disappointment. "The timing just isn't right." "Right the farm," he said, a hint of something like resentment in his voice. "Well, the offer stands if you change your mind." We chatted for a few more minutes about inconsequential things before ending the call. As I placed the phone back in its cradle, a familiar loneliness settled over me. Thomas hadn't even asked how I was managing or if I needed anything before their departure. The farm that had once been his childhood playground was now just an inconvenient obligation that kept his mother from joining family vacations. The next morning, I visited Martha for our weekly coffee meetup. Her kitchen warm and inviting with yellow curtains, and the scent of freshly baked muffins was my sanctuary away from home. "I don't understand these kids today," Martha said, after I told her about Thomas's call. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "My daughter's the same way. Lives in Minneapolis, calls once a month, acts like visiting the farm is some kind of punishment. They forget where they came from." "I try not to take it personally," I said, though the hurt was evident in my voice. "Thomas has his own life now, and Natalie never liked it here anyway." "Still," Martha insisted, "they could show a little more appreciation for all you've done. Did he even offer to help set things up so you could go along, hire a farm sitter or something?" I shook my head. The thought hadn't even occurred to Thomas. The days before their departure were filled with preparation. Not for their trip, but for my time alone on the farm. I needed to ensure everything was in working order. The water pump for the greenhouse had been acting up, so I spent an entire day fixing it. I prepared extra feed for the animals and organized my tools so nothing would be misplaced when I needed it urgently. 2 days before they left, Thomas unexpectedly showed up at the farm. It was the first time in months he had come alone without Natalie. "Just wanted to check on a few financial documents before we leave," he explained vaguely, heading toward the small office where I kept the farm's paperwork. "Dad had some investment accounts I'm reviewing." I thought it was odd. Harold's affairs had been settled years ago, and Thomas as our accountant had handled most of it. But I was so pleased to see him that I didn't question it. I made his favorite lunch, a beef and vegetable stew that had been simmering all morning, and we ate together at the kitchen table. "Mom, where do you keep your banking information?" he asked casually between bites. "In the filing cabinet's second drawer," I replied. "Why do you ask?" "Just making sure everything's organized," he said. "Have you thought about online banking? It would make things easier to manage." "I prefer doing things the old-fashioned way," I admitted. "The internet connection out here isn't always reliable anyway." He nodded, and the subject dropped. After lunch, he spent nearly an hour in the office while I tended to the greenhouse. When he emerged, he was carrying a folder. "Just some documents I need to review," he explained when I gave him a questioning look. "Financial advisor stuff, nothing to worry about." I trusted him completely. After all, he was my son and a certified accountant. If anyone should be handling financial paperwork, it was Thomas. The day they left for Florida was sunny, but cool. Thomas, Natalie, and Catherine stopped by the farm on their way to the airport. Their visit lasted less than 20 minutes, barely enough time for me to offer them coffee. "We really need to get going, Mom," Thomas said, checking his watch repeatedly. "Our flight leaves in 3 hours, and we still have to return the rental car at the airport." Natalie didn't even bother to get out of their sleek SUV, just waved at me through the window, her designer sunglasses firmly in place despite the cloudy day. Catherine, elegant, in an expensive-looking travel outfit, gave me a perfunctory hug that felt more like a pat on the back. "Don't work too hard, June," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "At your age, you should be thinking about selling this place and enjoying life a little." I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. "I am enjoying my life, Catherine. The farm is what makes me happy." As they drove away, dust from the gravel driveway swirling behind their car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Thomas had been distracted, avoiding eye contact, but I pushed the thought away. He was probably just anxious about their trip, making mental lists of what he might have forgotten. I stood in the driveway until their car disappeared around the bend, then turned back to the farmhouse, now eerily quiet. 10 days alone stretched before me. 10 days of uninterrupted work, silent meals, and empty rooms. I squared my shoulders and headed toward the barn. The animals at least would be happy to see me. The first morning alone on the farm, I woke at 4:30 as usual, my body conditioned by decades of farm life to rise before the sun. For a brief, disorienting moment, I reached across the bed for Harold, as I sometimes still did, even 5 years after his passing. My hand met cold, empty sheets, and reality settled back in. Not only was Harold gone, but now Thomas was far away too, enjoying the Florida sunshine, while I faced another day of solitary labor. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I made my way downstairs in the pre-dawn darkness. The coffee maker programmed the night before had already filled the kitchen with its rich aroma. That first cup of coffee was always my moment of peace before the day's demands began their relentless march. By 5:15, I was in the barn, greeted by the soft lowing of our 6 dairy cows. They weren't a commercial operation anymore, just enough to provide milk for myself and to make the artisanal cheeses I sold at the local farmers market. The familiar routine of feeding and milking offered comfort in its predictability. The animals didn't care if I was alone or surrounded by family, they simply appreciated the consistency of care. "Good morning, ladies," I said to the cows, my voice echoing slightly in the barn. Speaking aloud helped combat the silence, even if my audience couldn't respond. After the cows came, the chickens, 30 Rhode Island Reds, that provided more than enough eggs for my needs and a modest side business. The greenhouse followed, where I spent an hour watering seedlings and checking on the tomato plants that were already forming small green fruits. By mid-morning, I discovered a broken section of fence in the north pasture. Harold would have fixed it in no time, his strong hands working the wire with practiced ease. Thomas, had he been there and willing, could have helped. Instead, I gathered the tools myself, loaded them into the wheelbarrow, and made the long trek across the field. The fence repair took twice as long as it should have. My hands, though strong from years of farm work, lacked Harold's mechanical precision. The spring sun beat down on my back as I wrestled with the wire cutters and pliers, sweat dripping into my eyes. By the time I finished, my lower back was screaming in protest, and my fingers were scraped raw in several places. Lunch was a solitary affair at the kitchen table that could seat 6. I'd made a simple sandwich and ate it while staring out the window at the fields beyond. How many meals had this table witnessed over the decades? Birthday celebrations, holiday feasts, Sunday dinners, when Thomas would bring college friends home. Now it held just one plate, one glass, one set of utensils. The silence was broken only by the ticking of the antique wall clock that had been a wedding gift from Harold's parents. After lunch, I tried calling Thomas to see if they had arrived safely in Florida. The call went straight to voicemail. "Hi, sweetie, it's Mom," I said after the beep. "Just checking to make sure you all arrived safely. Give me a call when you can. Love you." The afternoon brought more work. The vegetable garden needed weeding, a never-ending task that usually gave me pleasure. Today, though, each weed pulled felt like a small battle in an unwinnable war. The farm was slowly defeating me, its demands greater than what one aging woman could reasonably manage. By evening, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. I made a simple dinner, ate half of it, and stored the rest in the refrigerator. Too tired even for television, I sat on the porch in Harold's old rocking chair, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. In the distance, a whippoorwill called its melancholy song, a fitting soundtrack for my mood. "I miss you, Harold," I whispered to the gathering darkness. "I'm not sure how much longer I can do this alone." Sleep came quickly that night, my body too tired to allow my mind its usual wanderings. But the respite was brief. Another day awaited, identical in its demands and its solitude. The second day began much like the first, though my muscles protested more vigorously against the early rising. The weather had turned, with dark clouds threatening rain. Perfect, I thought grimly. Just what I needed when there was so much outdoor work to be done. The old tractor, which had been running perfectly fine the previous week, decided this was the ideal moment to develop issues. The engine sputtered and died as I attempted to move a pile of mulch to the garden beds. "Come on, you stubborn thing," I muttered, turning the key again. The engine coughed, whined, then fell silent. Harold had taught me the basics of tractor maintenance over the years. I checked the fuel, the oil, the battery connections. Nothing obvious presented itself. After an hour of increasingly frustrated attempts, I gave up. The local mechanic, who usually helped with major repairs, was away at his daughter's wedding in Minnesota. I would have to make do without the tractor for now. The rain began around noon, a gentle but persistent drizzle that soaked into my jacket as I hurried to secure equipment and ensure the animals had adequate shelter. By the time I made it back to the house, I was drenched and shivering. After changing into dry clothes and warming myself with hot tea, I remembered I needed to pay the monthly bills. The electricity, internet, and insurance payments were all due in the next few days. I sat at the small desk in the corner of the living room and opened my checkbook. As I prepared to write the checks, a nagging concern prompted me to check my bank account balance first. Opening the laptop Thomas had insisted I buy last Christmas, I navigated to the bank's website. The password was saved, thankfully, as I could never remember the complex combination of letters, numbers, and symbols Thomas had set up for me. When the account page loaded, I blinked in confusion. The balance was much lower than it should have been. Where there should have been nearly $8,000, the screen showed just over $2,000. I checked the transaction history, scrolling through the entries with growing alarm. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize, several large purchases at stores I'd never heard of, and ATM withdrawals from locations in Florida. My heart began to pound as the implications became clear. Someone was using my account. My first thought was identity theft, some criminal who had somehow obtained my information. With shaking hands, I reached for my purse to check my debit card. It was exactly where it should be, in the zippered compartment where I always kept it. I rarely used the card, preferring to pay with checks or cash, but I kept it for emergencies. Confused and worried, I decided to try using the card to see if it was still active. The rain had eased to a drizzle, so I drove the 10 miles to town to the ATM outside our local bank branch. Inserting the card, I entered my PIN and requested a withdrawal of $100. The machine whirred for a moment before displaying a message, "Insufficient funds for this transaction." That was impossible. Even with the mysterious withdrawals, there should have been enough for a $100 transaction. I tried a smaller amount, $50. The same message appeared. The bank was closed, it being Saturday afternoon, and wouldn't reopen until Monday. I could call the customer service line, but resolving issues over the phone was always more complicated and time-consuming. For now, I was effectively without access to my own money. The drive back to the farm felt longer than usual, my mind racing with questions and fears. Who could have accessed my account? How was it possible when my card was still in my possession? And most pressingly, how would I manage financially until this was resolved? Back at the farmhouse, I tried calling Thomas again. Still no answer. I left another message, this one more urgent. "Thomas, it's Mom. There seems to be a problem with my bank account. Please call me back as soon as possible." The rest of the day passed in a fog of worry. Without the tractor, I was limited in what farm work I could accomplish. The rain continued intermittently, further restricting my activities. By evening, Thomas still hadn't returned my call. I went to bed with an uneasy heart, my sleep fitful and filled with anxious dreams. In one, I was lost in a maze of cornfields calling for Thomas, while an unseen clock ticked ominously in the background. In another, I stood at an ATM that kept spitting out blank papers instead of money, while people lined up behind me, their faces masks of disapproval. Morning came too soon, bringing with it a continuation of yesterday's problems and the addition of new ones. The rain had stopped, but the ground was sodden, making every step across the farm a struggle. My back, already sore from the fence repair, now sent sharp pains down my leg whenever I bent over. And still no word from Thomas. The third morning dawned clear and bright, a mockery of my darkening mood. My back pain had worsened overnight, forcing me to move slowly as I completed the morning chores. Every bend to feed the chickens, every reach to grab a tool, sent lightning bolts of pain down my spine. At 65, I was still strong and capable, but moments like these were sharp reminders of my age and limitations. The financial situation weighed heavily on my mind. Without access to my account, and with the mystery of the unexplained withdrawals still unsolved, I felt vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced before. The farm required constant investment seed money for planting feed for animals, repairs for equipment. My dwindling cash reserves wouldn't last long. By midday, I had managed to coax the temperamental tractor back to life through a combination of stubbornness and what Harold used to call mechanical sympathy. The small victory did little to lift my spirits as I used it to haul compost to the vegetable beds, the physical labor aggravating my back pain. It was nearly 2 o'clock when my cell phone rang. Thomas's name flashed on the screen, sending a rush of relief through me. Finally, I could get some answers about the bank situation. "Thomas, thank goodness," I answered, wiping soil from my hands. "I've been trying to reach you." His voice came through tense and accusatory, catching me completely off guard. "Mom, what happened to the cards? We can't withdraw a single cent." I froze, confusion washing over me. "What cards are you talking about?" "Your bank cards, Mom," he snapped as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "The ones I've been using for our trip expenses." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I gripped the tractor's steering wheel for support, trying to process what I was hearing. "My bank cards, Thomas, I don't understand. I have my debit card right here in my purse." There was a pause, then Thomas sighed with exaggerated patience. "Not that one, Mom. The backup card. The one in your filing cabinet." My mind raced back to his visit before their trip, his time alone in my office, his unusual questions about banking information. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. You took my spare debit card. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Without asking me. Look, it's not a big deal, Thomas said defensively. Catherine was supposed to cover the trip expenses, but she's having some liquidity issues with her investments. I was going to pay you back as soon as we returned. I just needed to borrow the card temporarily. Borrow, I repeated, anger beginning to replace shock. Thomas, there have been thousands of dollars withdrawn from my account. That's not borrowing, that's stealing. Don't be so dramatic, Mom, he scoffed. It's not stealing when it's family. Besides, I know exactly how much your farm brings in. You could easily spare the money for a week or two. His dismissive tone cut deeper than the financial betrayal. This was my son, the boy I had raised to understand the value of honesty and hard work, now casually justifying theft from his own mother. How did you even know my PIN? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. It was in your address book under B for bank, he said, confirming my fear. During his office visit, he must have searched through my personal papers. Not exactly Fort Knox security, Mom. So you took my card without permission, used my PIN that you found by snooping through my things, and spent thousands of dollars without even asking me first. My voice was rising now, trembling with anger and hurt. Why are you being like this? Thomas demanded. We're family. I needed help, and you have the means to help. What's the problem? The problem, I said through clenched teeth, is that I can't access my own money now. The account is showing insufficient funds. I have bills due, Thomas. Feed to buy for the animals. Repairs needed on equipment. This is my livelihood, not your vacation fund. Well, something must have happened on your end, he insisted. The card was working fine yesterday, and today it suddenly declined everywhere. Did you call the bank and report it stolen or something? The audacity of his accusation left me momentarily speechless. He had stolen from me, and now he was blaming me for the consequences. No, Thomas, I didn't report anything. I finally managed. The card is declining because you've spent most of my money. There's hardly anything left in the account. That's impossible, he said. We've only spent a few thousand. Your account had way more than that. Another puzzle piece clicked into place. Did you also access my savings account? I asked, dreading the answer. His hesitation told me everything. Catherine said her funds would be available by tomorrow, so I just moved some money temporarily. It's no big deal. No big deal. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. You emptied my accounts without my knowledge or permission, and it's no big deal. You're overreacting, Thomas insisted. It's just money. I'll pay it back. With what, Thomas? You just said Catherine's having financial problems. Where is this repayment coming from? I'll figure it out, he said vaguely. But right now we're stuck in Florida with no access to funds. Can you call the bank and see what's going on with the card? His complete lack of remorse, his focus only on his own predicament, rather than the harm he'd caused me, was the final straw. 40 years of maternal patience and understanding snapped in an instant. No, Thomas, I will not call the bank to help you continue stealing from me, I said, my voice suddenly steady and cold. What you've done is not just morally wrong, it's illegal. You committed fraud and theft against your own mother. Mom, be reasonable, he began, but I cut him off. I've been reasonable my entire life. I supported your dreams even when they took you away from the farm. I never complained when visits became rare, when calls went unanswered. I respected your life choices, but this crosses a line I never imagined would need to be drawn. You betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way. So what are we supposed to do? He demanded. Just be stranded here with no money. That's not my problem to solve, I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. You're an adult, Thomas. Figure it out. I ended the call before he could respond, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. For several minutes, I sat motionless on the tractor seat, staring across the fields that had been my home and livelihood for 4 decades. The land that would have been Thomas's inheritance one day. The betrayal cut bone deep. It wasn't just about the money, though, that was serious enough. It was the calculated nature of it. The planning. The deception. the assumption that I would simply accept it because we were family, the complete disregard for how it would affect me alone on the farm with bills to pay and work that required financial resources. As the initial shock began to fade, a cold determination took its place. I might be an aging widow alone on a farm, but I was not helpless, and I was certainly not going to be victimized by my own son. It was time to take action. The revelation of Thomas's betrayal left me reeling, but I couldn't afford the luxury of wallowing in hurt feelings. The farm's needs wouldn't wait, and neither would my bills. With renewed purpose, I drove back to the house and began a thorough investigation of exactly what had happened to my finances. At the kitchen table, I spread out my bank statements and account information. The evidence of Thomas's deception was painfully clear. Not only had he used my debit card for multiple purchases and cash withdrawals in Florida, but he had also transferred a substantial sum from my savings account to checking, then withdrew that as well. All told, he had taken nearly $15,000, most of my liquid assets. The methodical way he had gone about it chilled me. This wasn't an impulsive act. He had planned it, executed it with precision, and clearly expected to get away with it. The question now was what to do about it. My first call was to the bank's customer service line. After navigating the automated system and waiting on hold for 20 minutes, I finally spoke with a representative who confirmed what I already knew. Multiple withdrawals had been made from my accounts at locations in Florida over the past 3 days. "Would you like to report fraudulent activity on your account, Mrs. Wilson?" the representative asked. The question gave me pause. Reporting fraud would mean acknowledging that Thomas had committed a crime. It could have serious consequences for him. Despite everything, he was still my son. "I need to think about that," I replied. "For now, I'd like to freeze all withdrawals from both accounts." "We can do that," the representative assured me, "and we'll send a new card to replace the one that may have been compromised." After ending that call, I sat in silence for several long moments, contemplating my next move. The farm's monthly expenses flashed through my mind: the electric bill, the property taxes due next month, feed for the animals, repairs for equipment. Without access to my accounts and with most of my money gone, how would I manage? The ringing of the phone interrupted my thoughts. Thomas again. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to speak with him yet, not until I had a plan. Instead, I called Martha. She answered on the second ring, and I found myself pouring out the whole story to her sympathetic ear. "That boy needs a serious reality check," Martha declared when I finished. "June, what he did is theft, plain and simple, family or not." "I know." I admitted, the words painful to say aloud. "But he's still my son. I don't want to see him in legal trouble." "And that's exactly why he felt comfortable doing this," Martha pointed out. "He knew you'd be too soft-hearted to hold him accountable. But sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their actions." Martha's words struck a chord. Had my unwillingness to confront Thomas about smaller issues over the years emboldened him to commit this larger betrayal? Had my maternal instinct to protect him actually enabled destructive behavior? "What would you do in my position?" I asked her. "I'd call a lawyer," she said without hesitation. "Not necessarily to press charges, but to understand your options and protect yourself going forward. John Peterson handled Harold's estate right. He'd be a good place to start." After we hung up, I followed Martha's advice and called John Peterson's office. His secretary was able to fit me in for a late afternoon appointment, squeezing me in between his regular clients due to the urgent nature of my situation. John's law office was in the heart of our small town, a converted Victorian house with gleaming hardwood floors and walls lined with law books. John himself had aged since I last saw him, his hair now completely white, but his sharp intelligence remained unchanged. "June." He greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk to shake my hand. "It's been too long. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances." I explained the situation to him in detail, holding back tears through sheer force of will. John listened attentively, taking occasional notes, his expression growing increasingly grave. "What Thomas did constitutes both theft and fraud," he confirmed when I finished. As your son, he may have felt entitled to your assets, but legally speaking, he had no right to take your card or access your accounts without permission. What are my options? I asked, dreading the answer. You could report this to the police as a crime, John said. Given the amount taken, it would be a felony charge. However, he added, seeing my distress, there are other approaches that might resolve this without criminal proceedings, such as a formal demand letter from my office for starters, requiring full repayment plus any fees or damages you've incurred. We could also explore civil remedies rather than criminal ones. John went on to explain various legal avenues, but what resonated most was his advice about protecting myself going forward. June, regardless of how you handle this specific incident, you need to secure your assets against future attempts. I'd recommend changing all your accounts' passwords and security questions. Consider placing a credit freeze to prevent anyone from opening new accounts in your name. And most importantly, be very careful about who has access to your financial information, in the future, family included. The implication that I might need to protect myself from my own son in the future was heartbreaking, but necessary to acknowledge. Thomas had crossed a line I never imagined possible, and trust once broken couldn't be instantly restored. As I left John's office with a folder of information and options to consider, my phone showed 3 missed calls from Thomas and 2 from Natalie. I wasn't ready to speak with either of them yet. Back at the farm, I found an unexpected visitor waiting. Amanda Reeves, the manager of the local branch of my bank, and an old friend was sitting in her car in my driveway. "June," she said, stepping out to greet me. "I hope you don't mind my stopping by. When I saw the account freeze request come through with the fraud investigation flag, I was concerned." Amanda and I had known each other for decades. Our children had attended the same schools, and we'd served on numerous community committees together over the years. "I appreciate your concern," I said, inviting her in for coffee. In my kitchen, Amanda spoke frankly. "The withdrawal pattern was unusual for your account, and the locations were all in Florida. I know Thomas lives in Madison. Is he involved in this?" I nodded, the admission painful. "He took my spare card before leaving for vacation, used it without my knowledge or permission." Amanda's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, June. That's a terrible position to be in. Family financial abuse is more common than people realize, especially against older individuals." The phrase financial abuse hit me like a physical blow. I had never considered myself a victim of abuse. I was strong, independent, capable. But wasn't that exactly what had happened? My son had used his knowledge of my personal information and his access to my home to take my money without consent. If it had been anyone other than my son, I wouldn't have hesitated to call it what it was: abuse. Amanda went on to explain some immediate options the bank could offer. "We can arrange an emergency loan to cover your immediate expenses, given your excellent history with us. It wouldn't replace what was taken, but it would help you manage until this is resolved." The offer was a lifeline I hadn't expected. "That would be incredibly helpful, Amanda. Thank you." "And June," she added, her voice gentle but firm, "consider filing a formal fraud report. I know he's your son, but what he did was wrong, and there should be consequences." After Amanda left, I spent a long time sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the family photos that lined the wall. Images of Thomas through the years, as a gap-toothed child on a tractor with Harold, as a teenager proudly showing off a blue ribbon from the county fair, as a college graduate, arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. When had that bright, honest boy turned into a man who could steal from his own mother? What had I missed? My phone rang again. "Thomas." This time I answered. "Mom," he began immediately, his voice tense. "The hotel just called us. They said our credit card has been reported stolen. What did you do?" "I didn't report anything stolen," I replied truthfully. "I froze my accounts to prevent further unauthorized withdrawals, which is my right." "You're making this into a much bigger deal than it needs to be," Thomas insisted. "We're stranded here with no way to pay for anything. The hotel is threatening to call the police if we don't settle our bill." "That sounds like a serious predicament." I acknowledged, my voice steadier than I expected. What do you plan to do about it? Mom, come on, he pleaded, his tone shifting from accusation to supplication. Just unfreeze the account for a day so we can get home. Then we can sort all this out. The old June, the one who existed before this betrayal, would have capitulated immediately. That June would have done anything to spare her son discomfort or embarrassment, even at her own expense. But that June had died the moment she discovered her son's theft. No, Thomas, I said firmly. I will not unfreeze the accounts. What you did was wrong on every level, and I will not enable it to continue. You can't be serious, he said, disbelief evident in his voice. You're really going to leave your own son stranded in Florida? You left yourself stranded in Florida when you chose to steal from me, I corrected him. Actions have consequences, Thomas. It's time you learned that. If you don't help us right now, he threatened, desperation creeping into his voice, I swear you'll never see your grandchildren again. Is that what you want? The threat struck deep, as he knew it would. My 2 grandchildren, Emma and Jack, were precious to me. The thought of being cut off from them was almost unbearable. But giving in to emotional blackmail would solve nothing. That's your choice to make, I said, though each word felt like glass in my throat. But know this, if you follow through on that threat, you'll be hurting your children far more than you'll be hurting me. And one day they'll learn what kind of man their father really is. The line went silent for several seconds. When Thomas spoke again, his voice was cold with fury. You'll regret this, Mom, I promise you that. He hung up, leaving me shaking but resolute. I had stood my ground. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I had prioritized my own well-being over Thomas's demands. It didn't feel triumphant or empowering. It felt necessary and painful, like lancing an infected wound. The road ahead would be difficult. The financial damage was significant. The emotional damage perhaps irreparable. But as I looked out the window at the farm that had sustained me through 4 decades of joy and heartbreak, I knew I had the strength to weather this storm too. I was not a victim. I was a survivor. And it was time to start acting like one. The aftermath of my confrontation with Thomas unleashed a torrent of accusations and threats. My phone became a battleground with calls and texts from not just Thomas, but Natalie and Catherine as well. Each message more vitriolic than the last. You've completely ruined our vacation, Natalie texted. I hope you're happy with yourself. Catherine's voicemail was even more scathing. I always knew you were selfish, June, but this takes it to a new level. A mother who truly loved her son would do anything to help him, not abandon him when he needs you most. Their attempts to shift blame and make me feel guilty only strengthened my resolve. The reality was clear. They had conspired to take my money without permission, spent it freely with no thought of repayment, and now were angry that the well had run dry. I consulted again with John Peterson, who advised me to document everything. Every call, every text, every financial transaction. He helped me draft a formal demand letter requiring full repayment of all funds taken, plus additional compensation for the overdraft fees and emergency loan interest I was now incurring. We'll send this by certified mail, John explained. It establishes a paper trail and demonstrates that you're serious about pursuing this matter. The next call I made was to the bank's fraud department. This was the step I'd been most hesitant to take, knowing it could have serious consequences for Thomas. But Amanda's words about financial abuse kept resonating in my mind, along with Martha's insistence that real love sometimes meant allowing people to face the consequences of their actions. I need to report unauthorized use of my debit card, I told the fraud representative, my voice only slightly shaky. The process was more straightforward than I'd feared. I explained the situation honestly, including the fact that the person who had taken the card was my son. The representative walked me through the steps of filing a formal claim, explaining that the bank would investigate and might be able to recover some of the funds. Will my son face criminal charges? I asked, the question weighing heavily on my heart. That's a separate decision, the representative explained. Our investigation is focused on recovering the funds for you. Whether to pursue criminal charges is something you would decide with law enforcement. But I should note that filing a false fraud claim is itself a crime, so it's important that everything you've told us is accurate. Every word is true, I assured them, though the truth was painful to admit. With the fraud claim filed, I began the process of rebuilding my financial security. Amanda helped me open new accounts at the bank with enhanced security measures in place. I changed all my passwords, PINs, and security questions, choosing information that Thomas would not know or be able to guess. John Peterson also helped me review all my legal documents, including my will and property deeds. What he discovered was shocking. "June," he said gravely, pointing to a document on his desk. "Did you authorize Thomas to add his name to the farm's deed?" My blood ran cold. "Absolutely not. The farm is solely in my name since Harold's passing." John showed me a form that had been filed with the county recorder's office just 2 weeks earlier, attempting to add Thomas as a joint owner of the property. The signature on the form looked like mine, but I had never seen the document before, let alone signed it. "This appears to be forgery," John said, his expression grim. "A clumsy one, thankfully. The notary stamp is from someone who doesn't exist in our state registry, which is why the filing was flagged for review and hasn't been processed yet." The discovery of this attempted property theft sent me reeling. It was one thing to take money from my accounts, but trying to steal the farm itself. The farm that Harold and I had built together over 4 decades. This was a betrayal so profound I could barely comprehend it. "What do we do?" I asked John. "First, we file a statement with the recorder's office identifying this as a fraudulent document. Then we need to place a freeze on your property records to prevent any further attempts. And June," he added gently, "we should discuss adding this to the police report we're preparing." Yes, a police report. John had convinced me that regardless of whether I wanted to press charges, documenting the crimes with law enforcement was crucial for protecting myself going forward. We had an appointment the following day with a detective specializing in financial crimes and elder abuse. The word elder still caught me off guard. I didn't think of myself as elderly. I was active, independent, sharp-minded. But in the eyes of the law at 65, I fell into a protected category, and what Thomas had done qualified as elder financial abuse. That evening I received another call from Thomas. This time his tone had changed completely. "Mom," he began, his voice conciliatory, "I think we got off on the wrong foot here. I never meant to upset you." "Taking thousands of dollars without permission tends to upset people, Thomas," I replied, keeping my voice level. "I know it looks bad," he admitted, "but I was desperate. Catherine promised to cover our expenses, then backed out at the last minute. Natalie had her heart set on this vacation. I didn't know what else to do." "You could have asked me," I pointed out, "explained your situation honestly, and requested help." "Would you have given me $15,000 for a beach vacation?" he asked skeptically. "Probably not," I acknowledged, "which is why you chose to take it instead of ask." There was a pause before he continued. "Look, we managed to book flights home. We'll be back tomorrow evening. Can we meet and talk this through? Work out a repayment plan or something?" The olive branch seemed promising, but I remained wary. "Where did you get the money for flights?" He hesitated before answering. "I called Grandma Rose. She wired us some cash. My mother at 87, living on a fixed income in her assisted living facility, had come to his rescue." I wondered what story he had told her to extract money, but decided that was a conversation for another day. "We can meet," I agreed, "but not at the farm. Let's meet at John Peterson's office at 10 on Thursday morning." "Your lawyer's office?" Thomas sounded alarmed. "Mom, we don't need lawyers involved in a family matter." "This stopped being just a family matter when you took my money without permission and tried to add your name to my property deed," I said firmly. "What are you talking about?" he asked, but the fake confusion in his voice confirmed my suspicions. He knew exactly what I was referring to. "The fraudulent deed transfer you attempted to file with the county," I clarified anyway. "The one with the forged signature and fake notary stamp." The line went silent for several long moments. When Thomas spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of friendliness. "You're making a huge mistake, Mom. I was trying to help secure your future. The farm is too much for you to handle alone. Everyone can see that except you. If you were concerned about my ability to manage the farm, you could have discussed it with me directly, I countered. Instead, you chose deception and forgery. Those are not the actions of someone trying to help. Whatever, he snapped. If you want to turn this into a legal battle, fine. But remember, I'm an accountant. I know exactly what your finances look like, including all the little cash transactions you don't report to the IRS. How do you think that would look to an investigator? The threat was clear, and it took my breath away. My own son was threatening to falsely report me for tax evasion if I pursued legal action against him. Are you blackmailing me now, Thomas? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm pointing out that nobody's hands are completely clean, he replied coolly. So maybe it's better if we handle this privately without lawyers or police. I ended the call, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the button. This was a side of my son I had never seen before, or perhaps had refused to see. Calculating, manipulative, threatening. The sweet boy who had once helped Harold build birdhouses on weekend afternoons seemed to have vanished, completely replaced by this stranger who wore his face. The next morning I called John and relayed Thomas's threats. He was not surprised. Financial abusers often escalate to threats when their victims start standing up for themselves, he explained. It's a control tactic. But June, I've reviewed your tax returns for years as your attorney. There's nothing there that would concern the IRS. Thomas is bluffing. Reassured, but still shaken, I continued with our plan. We filed the police report that afternoon, providing detailed documentation of both the bank fraud and the attempted property theft. The detective, a compassionate woman named Officer Rivera, treated me with respect and dignity throughout the process. You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Wilson, she assured me. Many people in your position never come forward out of shame or fear. I'm still afraid, I admitted. He's my son. I understand, she said gently. But what he did was wrong, and you deserve protection and justice. We'll proceed carefully, but we will proceed. As I drove back to the farm that evening, I noticed a car parked at the end of my driveway. Drawing closer, I recognized it as Martha's blue sedan. She stepped out as I approached, waving. Hope you don't mind the ambush, she called. Brought dinner. Figured you might not feel like cooking tonight. Martha's simple act of friendship brought tears to my eyes. In the chaos of the past days, I had neglected basic self-care, including proper meals. The container of homemade beef stew she handed me smelled divine. You're an angel, I told her as we walked toward the house together. Nah, she replied with a dismissive wave. Just an old farm woman who knows what it's like when the world turns upside down. After Bill died, you did the same for me. Remember that casserole you brought over every Thursday for 3 months straight? I had forgotten that, but she was right. We took care of each other in this community. Always had. It was a reminder I desperately needed that despite Thomas's betrayal, I was not alone. Over dinner, I filled Martha in on the latest developments, including Thomas's threats. That boy needs a reality check, Martha declared, refilling our coffee cups. And it sounds like you're finally giving him one. I never thought I'd be filing police reports against my own son. I said, the reality of it still surreal. You're not filing reports against your son, Martha corrected me. You're filing reports against someone who committed crimes against you. The fact that he's your son makes it worse, not better. Her perspective helped solidify my resolve. What Thomas had done wasn't a misunderstanding or a lapse in judgment. It was a calculated series of criminal acts against someone he should have protected and respected. The fact that I was his mother didn't excuse his behavior. It magnified its reprehensibility. As Martha was leaving, she paused at the door. June, I know you can handle the farm on your own. You've been doing it for years. But you don't have to do everything alone. The Johnson boys are looking for summer work before college starts back up. Strong backs, good work ethic. Might be worth considering some help around here, at least until this situation with Thomas settles down. The suggestion made sense. I had always prided myself on self-sufficiency, but the events of the past week had drained me physically and emotionally. Some temporary help would allow me to focus on the legal matters while ensuring the farm didn't suffer. "I'll think about it," I promised Martha. That night I slept soundly for the first time in days. I had taken concrete steps to protect myself and hold Thomas accountable. The path ahead would be difficult, especially if he followed through on his threat to keep my grandchildren away. But it was the right path. For perhaps the first time since Harold's death, I felt truly in control of my life and my future. The farm that had been my anchor for 40 years remained so. But now I understood that being its steward didn't mean I had to carry every burden alone. Accepting help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. And setting boundaries with those who would take advantage of my generosity wasn't cruel. It was necessary self-preservation. As dawn broke the next morning, I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun illuminate the fields Harold and I had cultivated together. Whatever happened with Thomas, this land remained mine. My history, my present, my future. No one could take that away from me, not even my own son. With renewed determination, I set my cup down and prepared to face whatever the day might bring. I was June Wilson, farmer widow mother. And now I was also a woman who refused to be victimized, even by those she loved most. That was a strength I never knew I possessed, until circumstances forced me to find it. 3 months passed, bringing summer's heat and the farm's busiest season. The legal proceedings against Thomas had progressed steadily, if slowly. The bank's fraud investigation confirmed what I already knew, that he had taken and used my card without authorization. They restored most of the stolen funds to my account, though Thomas would ultimately be responsible for repaying them. The attempted property theft was documented with the district attorney's office, adding to the seriousness of the charges Thomas faced. John Peterson had been right. The forgery was clumsy and easily proven false when compared to authentic examples of my signature. True to his threat, Thomas had initially prevented me from seeing my grandchildren Emma and Jack. That particular cruelty cut deepest of all. For the first several weeks, I cried myself to sleep thinking of their faces, wondering if they thought Grandma had abandoned them. But even this weapon eventually failed him. Natalie's sister, with whom I'd always maintained a cordial relationship, reached out to me after hearing Thomas's version of events, which apparently cast me as an angry, vindictive mother, punishing him for a simple misunderstanding. "Something about his story didn't add up," she told me during a phone call. "Natalie's been evasive too. I wanted to hear your side." After listening to the truth complete with documentation that John had helped me prepare, she was appalled. "June, I had no idea. This is criminal behavior, not a family squabble," she said, "and using the children as pawns is inexcusable." 2 weeks later, she arranged a coincidental meeting at a park near her home, where I was able to see Emma and Jack for an afternoon. Seeing their excited faces as they ran toward me calling Grandma in their sweet voices was a balm to my wounded heart. They hadn't forgotten me. They hadn't stopped loving me. On the farm, I had taken Martha's advice and hired the Johnson twins, 18-year-old boys with strong backs and willing attitudes, to help with the heavier work 3 days a week. Their assistance allowed me to keep the farm running smoothly while dealing with the ongoing legal issues and beginning to implement longer-term solutions for managing the property. The greenhouse had a particularly productive season, and I expanded my sales to include 2 more local restaurants that were eager for fresh local produce. The additional income helped offset the legal expenses, which, despite John's generosity in reducing his fees, were still significant. Martha remained a steadfast friend through it all, dropping by regularly with meals, gossip, and practical advice. She also introduced me to a support group for older adults who had experienced financial abuse from family members. Hearing others' stories, some far worse than my own, helped me process my feelings of shame and betrayal. "You know what amazes me about everyone in this group?" I told Martha after one particularly powerful meeting. "The resilience. These people have been hurt by those they should have been able to trust implicitly, yet they're still standing, still fighting, still finding joy in life." "Like you," Martha pointed out with a smile. Perhaps the most unexpected development came 6 weeks after the confrontation. Thomas called his tone subdued and lacking the defensive anger that had characterized our previous conversations. "Mom," he began tentatively, "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I owe you an apology." I remained silent, waiting for more than just words. "What I did was wrong," he continued when I didn't respond. "Not just taking the money, but everything after. The threats, keeping the kids from you, trying to take the farm, all of it. There's no excuse." "No," I agreed, "there isn't." "I've started seeing a therapist," he said, surprising me. Thomas had always scoffed at the idea of counseling. "She's helping me understand why I did what I did. It's not easy facing these parts of myself." "I imagine not," I said, still cautious but listening. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever," he continued. "But I wanted you to know that I'm working on repaying the money. I took a second job on weekends, and I'm selling my boat." The boat had been Thomas's pride and joy, purchased 2 years ago against my gentle suggestion that it might be more than he could afford. That he was willing to sell it indicated a level of seriousness I hadn't expected. "That's a start," I acknowledged. "But Thomas, the money was never the main issue. It was the breach of trust, the willingness to steal from your own mother, then threaten her when she stood up for herself." "I know," he said quietly, "and I don't know if I can ever make that right, but I'd like to try if you'll let me." Over the following weeks, Thomas began making regular payments toward what he owed. Small amounts at first, but consistent. He also sent letters to Emma and Jack that he asked me to read to them during our now regular visits, explaining that he had been wrong to keep them from their grandmother, and that the problems between us were entirely his fault, not mine. While I appreciated these gestures, I maintained the legal proceedings. John had helped me understand that forgiveness and accountability could coexist. I could begin to rebuild a relationship with my son while still ensuring that the legal consequences of his actions were fulfilled. The most profound change, however, was within myself. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed: the ability to stand firm in the face of manipulation, the courage to seek help when needed, the wisdom to set boundaries even with those I loved most. I also learned the difference between genuine love and enabling destructive behavior. For years, I had confused the two, believing that a mother's love meant accepting any treatment, overlooking any transgression, sacrificing any boundary for her child's benefit. Now I understood that real love sometimes meant saying no, holding people accountable, and requiring respect. On a warm evening in late August, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The farm stretched before me, verdant and productive. The Johnson boys had helped me repair the old tractor, and it sat gleaming with fresh paint near the barn. The greenhouse was full of fall seedlings ready for transplanting. After the tumult of the spring, a sense of peace had returned to my life. My phone chimed with a text message from Thomas. He had sent a photo of Emma's first day of school outfit that she wanted Grandma's approval on. These small, normal interactions were slowly rebuilding our fractured relationship. Not to what it had been that was impossible now, but perhaps to something more honest, more balanced. The road to reconciliation would be long, and there would likely be setbacks along the way. Thomas had done serious damage to our relationship, and rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort on his part. But I was cautiously optimistic that we might eventually find our way to a new understanding. As darkness fell, I remained on the porch, listening to the night sounds of the farm. The distant lowing of cows, the chirp of crickets, the soft rustle of wind through the cornfields. This land that Harold and I had nurtured for 40 years had taught me many lessons about patience, perseverance, and the cycles of growth and renewal. Now it had taught me perhaps the most important lesson of all, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, to refuse to be diminished, or taken advantage of, even by those closest to you. I had learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary. That asking for help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. That being alone didn't have to mean being lonely or vulnerable. I had learned that I was stronger than I knew. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but I would face it with newfound confidence and clarity. My relationship with Thomas would never be the same, but perhaps it could eventually be healthier based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. My grandchildren would grow up seeing a grandmother who modeled self-respect and appropriate boundaries, not doormat behavior. And I would continue to tend this land that had sustained me through the darkest times, finding joy in its rhythms and peace in its constancy. I had learned that you can love someone deeply while still refusing to be their victim. That forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or enabling. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable for their actions. These were hard-won lessons, but valuable beyond measure. And as I finally rose from the porch swing and headed inside for the night, I carried them with me like precious seeds ready to plant and nurture in the seasons to come. I have found that even in our darkest moments, there are opportunities for growth and self-discovery. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you love? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and self-discovery. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and your worth. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength within yourself to face whatever challenges come your way.